9 stories are waiting for you. Real lives from a tradition that has been making people lighter for 2,500 years. A king who watches mountains roll in from every direction. A monk who answers a raging stranger without raising his voice. A poor man who discovers something sewn into the hem of his own robe. A hare who gives away the only thing it has. These are the stories for tonight. Something tired is in the room with you tonight. It has been there for weeks, perhaps for years. You do not have to tell anyone what it is. It is welcome here, just as it is. Tonight, nothing has to be solved. Nothing analyzed. Nothing named. For the next hour, you can simply let it settle while these stories do their quiet work on you. Let the body soften now. Shoulders, jaw, the space behind the eyes. The breath does not have to be anywhere. There is nothing you need to do for the next 3 hours except let the stories find their way in. They know where to go. Some of what comes will be familiar. Some of it will surprise you. 1 or 2 images will stay with you long after the final breath of this video. You are not here to learn these stories by heart. You are here to be carried by them. So make yourself comfortable. Lie down if you'd like. Wherever in the world tonight finds you, you are welcome here. The first story begins with someone who could not sleep. His name was Malunkyaputta. 2,500 years ago, in a forest outside a city called Savatthi, he lay on a thin mat of woven reeds in a small hut, staring into a darkness that would not let him rest. He had come to the Buddha 7 years ago, shaved his head, put on the saffron robes, walked the paths, eaten 1 meal a day, watched his breath for 1,000 mornings. And still, on this particular night, the questions were in the bed with him. 1 question, then another, then another. 10 of them, turning over and over in the dark until the dark itself felt crowded. Anyone who has ever lain awake at 3 in the morning, trying to think their way out of the thing that is sitting on their chest, already knows this room, already knows this mat, already knows the particular brightness of a mind that will not let itself rest. Is the world eternal, or does it come to an end? Is the body the self, or is there something separate from the body? Does the one who awakens exist after death, or does he not exist? Or both, or neither? Malunkyaputta turned the questions over, the way a man turns a coin in his pocket to feel its shape through the cloth. He had been turning them for weeks, for months. If he was honest, he had eaten less. He had stopped noticing the white flowers on the sal trees. When the other monks passed him in the courtyard, he had begun to look at them sideways, as if they were walking with a lightness that had been taken from him, or had never been his in the first place. The forest said nothing about any of it. The Buddha said nothing either, because no one had yet gone to the Buddha and asked. Before the first birds began, Malunkyaputta decided. He would go to the teacher in the morning. he would present the questions plainly, and if the one who was called fully awakened could not or would not answer them, he would leave. He had not spent his youth for nothing. If the Buddha did not know what the world was, or what the self was, or what waited on the other side of this life, then let him say so, simply and without evasion. Let a man find another teacher. Let a man find another path. Malunkyaputta lay in the dark rehearsing the speech. He told himself he was being reasonable. He told himself he was only asking for what any honest seeker should ask. And he did not notice, because no one ever notices, that he was also asking for permission to leave. That some part of him had already decided the Buddha would fail the test, and that this was the part of him doing the testing. At first light he rose. The dew was on the grass. The mist moved low between the trees like something breathing in slow animals. He did not notice the beauty of the morning, because he was rehearsing. The other monks saw him walking with the wrong kind of weight in his shoulders, and the older ones, who had seen this before in others, moved quietly out of his path. One of the senior monks, Ananda, watching from the shade of a mango tree, saw Malunkyaputta approaching and lowered his eyes. Something was coming. He did not yet know what. The Buddha was seated under a tree, in the same position he held any other morning. The early light on his robe was the color of wheat. Malunkyaputta came near, stopped 3 paces away, bowed because he still remembered the form, and sat to one side because he still remembered that also. And then he spoke. He spoke without softness. He listed the 10 questions one by one, deliberately, so they could not be mistaken for anything else. And at the end he made his ultimatum. Lord, if you know these things, tell me, and if you do not know them, say plainly that you do not know. If you cannot answer, I will set aside the training, put on the white clothes of the householder, and return to the life I left. I have given you 7 years. The silence that followed was enormous. It had a shape. The birds continued. The wind moved in the leaves. And inside that morning there was a pressure, as if the forest itself were waiting to hear what the Buddha would do. The Buddha looked at Malunkyaputta for a long moment. His expression was steady. It was the look a father gives a son who has brought home a problem that will dissolve only when the son looks at the problem differently. And then the Buddha spoke. Malunkyaputta, did I ever say to you, come and live the holy life under me, and I will explain to you whether the world is eternal, or whether the one who awakens exists after death? Did I ever make you that promise? Malunkyaputta had to admit it. He had not. The Buddha had never promised such a thing. The monk had brought his own demand, 7 years late, and called it a bargain. Then the Buddha began. Listen. Let me tell you what this is like. A man is walking through a forest. He is walking his own path, minding his own life. An arrow strikes him in the chest. An actual arrow, with a wooden shaft, with feathers for fletching, with a metal tip, with poison already entering his blood. He falls to the path. He lies there, bleeding, Now suppose, said the Buddha, that the man's companions run for a surgeon, and the surgeon comes quickly, with his knife, with his salves, with his bandages, and the wounded man, still lying on the path, holds up a weak hand. Wait. Before you remove this arrow, I must know certain things. Tell me the caste of the man who shot me. Was he a warrior, a priest, a merchant, a servant? Tell me his family name, his height, the village of his birth. Tell me the wood that his bow was carved from. Tell me whether his bowstring was made from hemp, or from sinew, or from reed. Tell me the type of feathers on the fletching. Tell me the metal of the arrowhead. Was it iron? Was it bronze? Was it something else? Tell me the name of the tree that the shaft was cut from. The surgeon would begin to work while the man spoke. The man would refuse. Remove nothing, he would say, until I have my answers. And the Buddha looked at Malunkyaputta across the morning air. Tell me, monk, what would happen to such a man? Malunkyaputta did not have to answer. He understood the answer. The man would die. He would die in his questions, with the arrow still in him, having learned none of the things he had demanded to know, having lost the only thing that mattered, which was his life. The answers, even if they had arrived, would not have kept him in the world a single breath longer. The Buddha did not raise his voice. Whether the world is eternal or not eternal, I have not taught you that, he said, because knowing it does not remove the arrow. Whether the body is the self or something separate, I have not taught you that, because knowing it does not remove the arrow. Whether one who has awakened exists after death, or does not exist, or both, or neither, I have not taught you these things, because knowing them does not remove the arrow. These are the questions the arrow asks while it kills you. Knowing their answers would not ease the weight. And then the Buddha said what he had come into the world to say. What I have taught you, Malunkyaputta, is this. There is suffering. There is a cause for suffering. There is an end of suffering. And there is a path that leads to the end of suffering. These four I have taught, because these remove the arrow. Let that land for a moment. Something in you already knows the feeling of lying in the dark, asking the wrong questions. Why did this happen to me? What did I do wrong? What if I had stayed? What if I had left? What if they had loved me differently? What if the world were fair? Why me? Why now? Why at all? The mind circles these the way the tongue circles a loose tooth, worrying at the same spot, unable to let it be. The questions are not wrong exactly. Most of them come from real grief. They are simply the wrong medicine for what is actually happening, which is that somewhere inside the body, tonight, you are bleeding. The mind wants to solve the puzzle of the arrow before it will allow the surgeon close. And so it asks, and asks, and asks, and the night passes, and morning comes, and still nothing has been removed. Tonight, you are not required to answer the questions your mind is asking. You are allowed to let them hang in the air, not as enemies, not as failures, but as what they are, questions whose answers would not take the weight away. You are allowed to turn instead toward the arrow that is actually in the body, the tightness in the shoulders, the ache behind the ribs, the specific, simple thing that could be tended to tonight. The cup of water, the slower breath, the permission to close your eyes and not solve anything at all. In the forest that morning, Malunkyaputta sat for a long time without speaking. The 10 questions he had arrived with were still there. They had not been answered. The Buddha had not said yes or no to a single one of them. Malunkyaputta sat with this for a long time. When he finally rose, something in his chest had loosened that he had not asked anyone to loosen. He had arrived ready to walk out of the community, ready to put on the white clothes of the householder and go back to the life he had left. He walked back to his hut. His hands were no longer clenched around the 10 questions the way they had been at 3 in the morning. The questions were simply there now, the way stars are there at night, without needing him to do anything about them. Years later, when Malunkyaputta was an old man, he would sometimes tell younger monks about that morning. The teacher did not answer me, he would say. In that silence, he had given me everything. The Buddha had answered the real question, whether a man could rest inside a life that did not come with its final answer. The old monk's face softened when he told the story. The 10 questions had long since stopped being important. The capacity to not answer them, that had stayed. Something else had been transmitted in that forest, something Malunkyaputta would think about for years. He had arrived with the full weight of his demand. He had arrived ready to fight. The person sitting in front of him simply had not taken up the fight. The silence had absorbed the urgency the way earth absorbs rain. Something he had been certain he needed from the Buddha had never actually been needed at all. Another morning, another grove, another person approaching with the full weight of his demand. Rain had passed in the night, and the ground where the monks were gathered was still dark with it. The early sun came through the trees in long columns of light. Ananda was there again. So were a dozen others, seated in loose rows, waiting for the Buddha to begin the day's teaching. They heard the footsteps before they saw the man. Even the footsteps were angry, heavy on the soft earth, quick, the kind of walking that announces itself before the body arrives. And when the man came into the clearing, the younger monks felt their own chests tighten without knowing yet who he was. The human body knows what is coming when another human body approaches in that particular shape. His name was Akosaka Bharadvaya. He was a Brahmin, and he had come to deliver something to the Buddha. His brother had left home the previous season. His brother had shaved his head and put on the saffron robes and joined the Buddha's community of monks. For Akosaka, this was not a spiritual event. This was a betrayal. His brother had been the son their parents wanted. His brother had been the one the village looked at when a wedding was discussed. And now his brother was gone, living on one meal a day, walking dusty roads with a bowl in his hand, and Akosaka's family was suddenly a family with a missing piece. He had told himself he was going to this teacher to speak reason, to demand an explanation, to insist that the brother be returned. By the time his feet reached the grove, the plan had burned away. What was left was heat. What was left was the need to strike something, and a man's voice is often the closest weapon. Akosaka did not bow. He did not ask permission to speak. He stood in the clearing with his chest heaving from the walk, and he began. He called the Buddha names. He accused him of stealing sons from their families. He used words Ananda would not later repeat. He said the teachings were theft dressed as kindness. He said the robes were a disguise for a kind of man who took from people what they should never have given. The words came in waves, gathering force as they left him, because each sentence gave the next one more ground to stand on. The Buddha received the words. His face remained open. His shoulders remained soft. His breath remained even. He sat the way he had been sitting when Akosaka arrived, straight, breathing, present, and he listened. The younger monks watched the Buddha's face. They were looking for the sign of injury. It did not come. Anyone who has ever been on the receiving end of that kind of voice already knows what is happening in Akosaka's body. The chest, too full. The face, too hot. The words, falling out faster than the part of the mind that should be moderating them. Anyone who has ever been the one being spoken to that way already knows what is happening in the listener's body. The flinch, the urge to defend, the way the stomach drops when someone's anger finds you and the air in the room turns sharp, the way a person can, without moving, feel the insult landing in their chest like something physical has been thrown there. You might be carrying a version of that voice in you tonight. Someone who spoke to you that way once. Someone who still does. A parent, or a partner, or a boss, or a stranger whose voice somehow lodged itself in your nervous system on a day you did not know would matter. The voice does not need to be in the room with you to land in your chest. It can be remembered, and the landing happens anyway. You can be sitting alone, in a quiet room, and someone who is nowhere near you can knock you sideways with a sentence they said years ago. The insult lands inside a body that has never stopped holding space for it. When Akosaka had emptied himself, when the last insult had been spent, when the silence returned and began to feel strange, the Buddha did something no one in the grove had expected. He asked a question. He asked it quietly and without heat, as if he were genuinely curious about the answer. "Brahmin," he said, "tell me something. When guests come to your home, you prepare food for them. You set it before them in the way that is proper for guests. And if the guests, for some reason, do not eat if they set the dishes aside, If they refuse what you have offered, tell me this. To whom does the food belong then? The younger monks looked at each other. The question seemed beside the point. The question seemed absurd, given what had just happened. The Buddha was waiting, and Akosaka, through a breath still short from anger, had to answer. To me, of course, Akosaka said. His voice was still hot. It would be my food still. If they did not take what I had prepared, the food would return to the host. It would remain mine. The Buddha nodded once, slowly, as if the answer were the one he had expected. Then he said, in the same way, Brahmin, you have brought me a meal this morning. You have prepared it and set it before me, the abuse, the insults, the accusations, the ill will. These were for me. You offered them. I have not taken them. I do not accept them. And you and I both know, Brahmin, what happens to a gift that is not accepted. The clearing became very quiet. Akosaka's breath was still coming fast, and something was happening in his face. Something slower than anger. He had, without meaning to, answered his own question. He had, without meaning to, agreed with the rule. And now the rule was being applied to him, and he could not escape it without contradicting himself. Let that image sit for a moment. A meal prepared, a guest arriving at the door. The food laid out with care, or without it, but laid out, either way, and the guest declining. Not violently, without counter-accusation. Just the words, I do not take this. And the food, by its own quiet law, returning to the one who made it. What the Buddha did that morning was a statement of what was actually happening. Akosaka had come to deliver something. The Buddha had not accepted delivery. The thing delivered had therefore not changed hands. There is nothing cold in this. The Buddha is simply declining to receive what is being offered, and in that declining, the thing that was sent remains with the one who sent it. Most of us have never quite seen this possibility modeled. We learn the two familiar responses, swallowing or striking back, and we think those are the choices. The Buddha is doing a third thing, a quieter thing. And it works, because it is simply true. What the Buddha did is easy to misname. It sits somewhere outside the usual vocabulary. Not forgiveness, which would mean accepting and then releasing. Not denial, which would mean pretending nothing was said. But a clear-eyed refusal to receive. The words were sent. The words are now in the air. Whether they land in you is not entirely a matter of what was thrown. It is also a matter of what you agreed to receive. Some of what you have been carrying was never consciously accepted by you. It was dropped at the door, and you picked it up because no one had ever shown you that you could leave it there. A child assumes that whatever arrives must be theirs to carry. Tonight the door is open again. You can set the parcel back down on the threshold. You do not have to send it back with violence. You do not have to argue with the one who left it. You do not have to prove anything about yourself in order to decline. You can simply, by your own quiet law, allow it to remain with the one who made it. The voice inside you that has been saying unkind things, if that voice was delivered to you by someone else a long time ago, you have permission tonight to notice it is not yours and to let it go home. Akosaka was silent for a long time. The anger was still in his body when he turned. Anger does not leave that quickly. Underneath it, something had gone still. He had walked into the grove with a parcel in his arms, and now the parcel was still in his arms, and the man he had brought it for was not going to take it. He did not bow. He did not apologize. He did not have a conversion in that moment. The kind storytellers like to add in. He simply looked at the Buddha for a long time, and then he turned, and then he began to walk back through the grove in the direction from which he had come. The younger monks did not move until he was gone. Then they looked at each other, and then they looked at the Buddha, and the Buddha was already looking at something else, a small patch of sunlight moving slowly across a fallen leaf, as if the whole exchange had lasted, for him, about as long as the movement of that light. The younger monks later tried to talk about what had happened. Some of them wanted to call it a victory. Some of them wanted to call it a teaching. The Buddha did not name it. He went on with the day as if a small, quiet thing had occurred, which is all it had been. A gift had been offered. The gift had not been accepted. The gift had returned to its owner. Nothing more dramatic than that. The morning would live a long life in the memory of the community. Ananda would tell the story decades later. The younger monks, grown old, would tell it to their own students. The memory held on to one thing, the stillness of the one who had received those words. A stillness made of clarity, and clarity only. Something else became possible for the listeners in the grove that morning, something they would only recognize later. A small question began to form in them, one they had not asked before. What had they been carrying through all the years of their lives that had been delivered to them the way Akosaka had tried to deliver his abuse, dropped at the door, received without examination, carried thereafter as if it belonged to them? Take a breath, if one is available, and notice the parcels at your own door. The old voice of a parent who could never quite see you. The old voice of someone who loved you imperfectly, and whose imperfection you have been carrying as if it were a verdict on your worth. Each of these arrived at a door you did not yet know was a door. The poverty you have been walking through, the sense of not enoughness, the low background murmur that says you are missing something, it may have been delivered to you by someone else, long ago, and simply accepted at the door. The voice that says you are not enough may never have been your own voice. What you have actually been, all this time, may turn out to be something altogether different than what you were told. The house was quiet. The lamps had been lowered for the night, and the poor man was asleep on a couch in the guest room, his breathing heavy from too much wine. His friend sat beside him for a long moment. The friend was wealthy. The friend was kind. He had agreed to host this visit, knowing there would be wine and sleep, and that his poor friend had come a long way and would likely sleep for hours. An urgent message had arrived. A matter of business that could not wait. The friend would have to leave before morning, and his guest would wake to an empty house, with no one to say goodbye, and nothing to help him on his way forward. The friend looked down at the man asleep on the couch. They had known each other since childhood. They had lost touch, the way people do when lives travel in different directions. Even now, even after a good evening together, the friend could see that his companion's life had not gone the way either of them had hoped. The clothes were travel-worn. The shoes were thin. There was a carefulness in the way the man had eaten, as though he was not sure when the next meal would come. The friend could not bear to leave without giving something. He could not put a bag of coins in his friend's hand, because coins would be spent, and because his friend was proud in the way that people who have been poor a long time are proud. So he did something else. He took a jewel from the place in the house where the rare things were kept. Not a small one. A priceless one, wrapped in silk, held in a box that was itself made of something rare. He carried it to the couch. He lifted the hem of his sleeping friend's robe, and with a small needle and a length of thread, he sewed the jewel into the hem, carefully, so that it would not be felt by the body of the one wearing the robe. He worked quietly. He did not leave a note. A note would have been explained, and he did not want the gift to be explained. He wanted it to be carried. When his friend needed it, it would be there. The friend left the house before the first light. The poor man woke later that morning. His head ached. The house was empty. He called his friend's name a few times, and when no one answered, he understood that the visit was over and that his friend had gone. He gathered his things. He thanked the servants. He walked back out onto the road, and he continued the life he had been living before he came. Now, here is the part of the story that is hardest to tell, because it is long. In the telling, we are tempted to skip past it. The years are the medicine of this story, and so we will stay inside them for a little while. The poor man went back to his walking from town to town, looking for whatever labor could be found. Some days he ate. Some days he did not. Some days he worked in a stable, and the coin he was paid went for bread, and the bread was small, and he slept under a cart with the bread still in his body, grateful for it and unable to stop thinking about tomorrow. He passed through villages. He watched the people who lived there. He watched families eating their evening meal through open doorways, and children running in the streets, and men, his own age, walking home with their wives. And he carried inside himself a particular ache he could not name, but that was with him always. The ache had a quiet voice. The voice said, "You are missing something that these people have." something specific, something you have never been given. They were given it at birth, or by their families, or by some secret you have not been told, and you are walking through the world without it. And that is why your life is like this, and their lives are like that. He did not know what the missing thing was. He only knew that it was missing. On good days, he tried to tell himself it was something external. Money, connections, luck. On bad days, the story became more cruel, and he began to believe the thing missing was something inside him. Something defective or malformed, or simply never given to him, the way a body might be born without a particular organ that other bodies have. He began to move through his days with the quiet certainty that he was not quite whole, and that the people around him could feel it, and that this was the reason he was treated the way he was treated. There were small kindnesses along the way. An innkeeper who let him sleep in the kitchen on a cold night. A woman who handed him half a loaf and then turned away before he could thank her. A child who smiled at him without any reason. Each of these moments stayed with him. And each one also confirmed, in his own eyes, that he was a person who needed kindnesses. The kindness was evidence that something was off. Years went by. The robe he wore became older and patched again. It was not a good robe, but it was the one he had, and he kept wearing it, and he never examined its hem very closely, because why would he? One day, it was late afternoon, and he was passing through a market in a town he had never been to before. He heard his name called from across the street. He turned. A man was walking toward him, well-dressed, older than he remembered, but unmistakable. His friend. The friend crossed the street and took him by the arm, and stood for a moment just looking at him, and the look contained many things at once. Recognition, warmth, and something else. Something like sadness, but not exactly sadness. A kind of tender confusion, as a person feels when they see someone they love and realize that person has been living a harder life than they needed to live. "My friend," the wealthy one said, "why do you look like this?" The poor man did not know how to answer. "I have been working," he said. "I have been traveling. Life has been," he searched for the word, "difficult." The friend was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Reach into the hem of your robe." The poor man looked at him. He did not understand the sentence. "Reach into the hem," the friend said again. "Gently, near the bottom, where the fabric is folded." The poor man reached down. His fingers went to the hem of the robe he had been wearing for more years than he could count. He felt along the fabric slowly, and after a moment his fingertips encountered something hard under the cloth, a small round resistance that he had never noticed was there. He stopped. He felt it again. The friend was watching him. The friend said, "Do you feel it?" "Yes," the poor man said. His voice was very quiet. Yes, I feel it. Take it out, the friend said. It is yours. It has been yours since the night you stayed in my house. I sewed it into your hem before I left, because I knew you would need something, and I could not leave nothing. The poor man's hands worked slowly at the hem. The stitches came apart, and the jewel that had been against his body through every year of wandering, through every cold night, through every meal he had counted, through every moment of believing himself to be defective, the jewel fell into his palm. He looked at it. He did not speak. Let the image stay for a moment. A man holding a jewel in his palm, standing in the afternoon light of a market street, and nothing around him has changed. The street is the same. The people passing are the same. The body that has walked all those years is the same body. And yet his entire life, from the night in his friend's house to this very afternoon, has just been reorganized inside him. He had not been poor. He had never been poor. He had been wealthy the whole time, and he had been walking through his wealth as if it were poverty, because he did not know what he was carrying. The hunger he had known, the small indignities, the ache of watching other men with their wives, the suspicion that something was missing in him. All of it real, lived, carried in the body, but unnecessary. Simply unnecessary, because the thing he had been looking for had been sewn into the hem of his own robe from the beginning. He closed his hand around the jewel. He did not cry. He did not thank his friend. Not yet, because speech could not have carried what he felt. He simply closed his hand and stood in the market and let the recognition do its quiet work inside him. You are wearing a robe tonight. Not a robe of fabric, perhaps, but a robe just the same. The life you arrive into this evening, the body you are inside, the history you carry with you, the ordinary clothing of your being here. And in the hem of that robe, sewn into a place your fingers have not thought to touch, something is already present. It is not something you have to generate. It is not something you have to earn. It is not something you have to become worthy of through effort or practice or years of trying harder. It has been there since before you could remember, and it has been there through every season of feeling not enough, and it will be there after this hour is over. The voice that has been telling you that you are missing something has been wrong. Not because the feeling was false, the feeling has been real. The hunger has been real. The ache of comparing yourself has been real. But because the conclusion the feeling drew was wrong. The conclusion said, there is something defective about you. There is something missing that others were given. You are walking the world without a thing you cannot name, and that is why life feels the way it feels. The story is telling you something the voice cannot hear. You are not defective. You are not missing something the others have. You are carrying, right now, the thing you have been searching for. It has been called many things in many traditions. Awakening, Buddha nature, which means the capacity for awakening that is already yours. The ground of being, the original face. The names do not matter very much. The thing they point to is the jewel. It is the fact that you are, underneath everything that has happened to you, already whole, already enough, already the kind of being that does not need to become anyone in order to be worthy of being here. This is a hard thing for the mind to receive. The mind has been working very hard, for a very long time, on the project of earning its own worth. The mind has its receipts. It has its improvements. It has its list of things it must still accomplish before it is allowed to rest. The mind does not need to accept it tonight. The mind can keep its receipts. The jewel is not removed by the mind's refusal to acknowledge it. It sits quietly in the hem, under the cloth, waiting for the evening when the hand finally slows enough to feel something that has been there the whole time. Tonight, perhaps, is only the evening when the story is heard once. That is allowed. The story does not demand that you change in response to it. The story is simply there, and so is the jewel. The poor man in the Lotus Sutra does not immediately change his life. He walks onward. He stitches the jewel back into his robe, because a jewel in a hand is too visible for the road, and he resumes his walking. But something in him now walks differently. The days that follow are made of the same moments as before, the dust of the road, the small meal, the body that tires, and yet the meaning inside those moments has shifted. He is no longer walking towards something he lacks. He is walking with what he has always had. That changes, very quietly, how each moment arrives in him. The dust of the road is not the dust of someone who is failing to be elsewhere. It is simply dust. The small meal is not evidence of a deficit. It is simply a meal. The tiredness of the body is not proof of being in the wrong life. It is the tiredness that belongs to this body, in this hour, on this road, which is the one he is walking. The Buddha gave a teaching about this exact kind of arriving, about what happens when a person stops measuring this moment against the moment they think they should be in, and instead meets the moment they are actually in. It is the teaching we are moving toward now, because it is the natural next breath after the one we have just taken together. It was the hour before dawn. The light had not yet arrived. The darkness had begun to soften. The monk Samidhi sat at the edge of a hot spring near the monastery at Tapadar, his robe folded on a stone beside him, his body half submerged in the warm water, his breath barely visible in the cool air. He had risen before any of the others. He had walked down the path by memory, because the path was too dark to see. Now he was in the water, and the water was still, and for a little while he was not thinking of anything in particular. Then he felt the air change. When he looked up, there was a figure on the opposite bank. A figure made partly of light. One of the beings the early Buddhist texts call a devatar, a luminous being, older and stranger than a man, drawn sometimes to places where humans practice. The Devata did not speak for a long time. She only watched him, the way a person might watch a stranger who is doing something unexpectedly interesting. Finally, she said, "Monk, do you know the summary of the single auspicious attachment?" Samiti blinked. He did not know what she meant. He did not know there was such a summary. "Sister," he said, "I do not." "Do you?" She smiled. "No," she said. "I do not know it either. But it exists. It was given by the Blessed One. Learn it, monk. Master it. Treasure it. There is nothing more worth knowing than this." Then the air changed again, and she was gone, and Samiti was alone in the hot spring with his own breath in the cold air, and with a sentence he had never heard before now waiting to be understood. Let me stop the story here for a moment. Consider where your mind has been today. Not in general, specifically. This morning, when you opened your eyes, where was your attention? Was it in the body that had just woken, the weight of the blanket, the quality of the light in the room? Or was it already in a conversation that happened last week, in a meeting that is coming next Tuesday, in a worry that had no beginning and has no end, in a rehearsal of something you should have said, in a fantasy of something you hope will happen? Most days, for most of us, the mind arrives somewhere other than where the body is. The body is here. The mind is there. And the there is usually one of two places: the past, which has already happened, or the future, which has not yet happened. The past cannot be changed by our attention to it. We know this. And yet we return to it, turning the same moment over, replaying the conversation, asking what we should have said, asking whether they meant what we thought they meant, asking why the thing happened the way it did. The future cannot be lived by our rehearsal of it. We know this too. And yet we spend hours there, imagining conversations that have not happened, preparing for meetings that may not go the way we prepared, bracing for losses that may never come, hoping for arrivals that may look different when they finally arrive. The hour you are actually inside, the one right now, with its breath, its body weight, its particular light, passes largely unattended. The body is here, and the tenant is elsewhere, and has been elsewhere for so long that being here feels almost unnatural. Samiti climbed out of the hot spring. He dressed quickly. He walked the path back to the monastery with the sentence still in his mouth, the single auspicious attachment. A phrase he did not yet understand. A phrase he had been told was worth everything. He did not wait for the community to gather. He went directly to the Buddha's quarters. He bowed. He told the story of the hot spring and the Devata and the question he had not been able to answer. "Blessed One," he said, "I did not know the summary. I have come to ask it of you." The Buddha looked at him for a long moment. the way a teacher looks at a student who has finally arrived at the question. Then he said, "Listen, well, Samidhi." And he began to speak the verse. Do not chase after what has already passed. Do not lose yourself in what has not yet come. What has passed is already gone. What has not yet come is not yet here. Whatever arises now, in this moment, see clearly, without being shaken. Today is the day the diligent one practices. Tomorrow is not promised. Death does not wait for us to be ready. This, Samidhi, is the single auspicious attachment. This is the verse the Devata spoke of. Let the verse stay in the air for a moment. Do not chase after what has already passed. This is the first line, and it is the hardest one. The mind has built a shelter out of the past. The shelter is made of moments we return to because we think returning will fix them. The angry words we wish we had not said. The kind words we wish we had said. The closed door we wish we had opened. The open door we wish we had walked through. The mind returns to these places with a kind of exhausted hope, as though one more visit will finally resolve them. The past does not receive visitors. The past is not a country you can walk into. It is a memory held inside a present moment, and the visiting happens only in the now. Do not lose yourself in what has not yet come. This is the second line, and it is almost as hard. The mind has built another shelter, this one out of the future. The future is made of all the meetings that have not happened, the illnesses that might arrive, the arguments that might erupt, the compliments that might finally come, the relief that might finally land. The mind believes that if it rehearses enough, the future will arrive in the shape it has been rehearsed. This is almost never true. The future always arrives in a slightly different shape than the one we rehearsed, and the rehearsal is simply hours of our life spent inside a room that does not exist. What has passed is already gone. What has not yet come is not yet here. These are the simplest sentences the Buddha ever spoke, and they are also the hardest to believe. Part of us does not want to accept that the past is gone. We want to argue with it. We want to renegotiate it. We want it to be different than it was. And part of us does not want to accept that the future is not yet here. We want to hurry toward it. We want to pre-live it. We want to be on the other side of whatever is coming, so we do not have to sit inside the uncertainty of its approach. The past is gone. The future is not here. The only hour in which anything has ever actually happened in your entire life is the one you are in right now. Whatever arises now, in this moment, see clearly, without being shaken. This is the third teaching, and it sounds simple, and it is not simple. Seeing clearly does not mean analyzing. It does not mean understanding. It does not mean figuring anything out. It means the bare meeting of what is actually here, the breath as it is breathing, the body as it is sitting, the sound in the room, the feeling in the chest, the quality of the light on whatever wall is in front of you. Without being shaken does not mean without feeling anything. Feelings arise. Thoughts arise. Discomforts arise. The instruction is not to push them away. The instruction is to let them arise and pass without being toppled by them. You can be sad and not shaken. You can be tired and not shaken. You can be uncertain and not shaken. The mind that sees clearly has a ground under it, and the ground is not made by the content of what is passing through. It is made by the clear seeing itself. Today is the day the diligent one practices. Tomorrow is not promised. Death does not wait for us to be ready. These lines can sound harsh at first. They are not harsh. They are the gentle way the Buddha reminded Samidhi, and is reminding you tonight that the hour you are in is the only hour you actually have to practice being alive. Not tomorrow. Not when things are easier. Not when the work is finished. Not when you are less tired. Not when you have more time. The hour you have for being here is this one. Practicing being here is not an accomplishment. It is only a coming back. The mind will leave. It always leaves. The practice is not keeping the mind from leaving. The practice is noticing that it has left and returning gently to the breath that is happening, the body that is sitting, the hour that is moving through the room around you. Come back now, if you can. Feel the weight of wherever your body is resting. Notice the quality of your breath without changing it. Notice the small sounds in the room, whatever they happen to be. This is the hour you have. This is the only place you have ever actually been. Notice, too, how the mind will try to leave again almost immediately. A thought will arise. A worry will arise. A plan will arise. A regret will arise. This is not a sign that you have failed. It is a sign that the mind is doing what the mind does. Thoughts arise the way clouds cross a sky. The sky is not responsible for the clouds. The sky remains. The Buddha's verse is not a method for stopping thoughts. It is not a method for achieving any particular state. It is simply an invitation delivered more than 25 centuries ago, and somehow arriving in your room tonight to notice where you actually are and to return there as often as it takes, without self-criticism when the mind wanders off. Because the mind always wanders. For centuries, monks in caves and exhausted people on the edge of a bed have been practicing the same small, forgiving return. You are in that lineage tonight, simply as another person doing what countless others have done. Samidhi sat very still while the Buddha finished the verse. The room was quiet. The light through the window had shifted while the teaching was given, the way light shifts when something important has entered a room. He did not ask any questions. There was nothing to ask. The verse had already answered the question he did not know he was carrying, which was simply the question of where to live now, in this body, in this hour, in this unrepeatable day. He walked out of the Buddha's quarters. He walked back toward the hot spring where the Devata had appeared, though he did not expect to see her again. He walked through the ordinary light of an ordinary morning, and the ordinary light seemed, for the first time in a long while, like enough. Feel what it is like, for a moment longer, to be the one who is here. Not the one who was hurt last Tuesday. Not the one who is dreading next Monday. The one who is breathing right now, in this chair, in this room, in this evening, with this particular quality of tiredness or quietness or ache or ease. This is the single auspicious attachment, not a discipline, not an achievement. Simply the willingness to be here, as often as the mind leaves, as often as it returns. The next story carries us onto a dusty road, where a young seeker with a hungry mind is about to pass a stranger in saffron robes. A single line, offered almost in passing, will open a door the seeker has been standing in front of his entire life, without ever seeing that it was a door. Stay with the breath. Stay with the hour. The next meeting is about to happen, between two people who do not yet know that their brief conversation will become one of the most quietly life-changing moments in this tradition. The road ran from the bamboo grove to the city of Rajagaha. It was mid-morning. The heat had begun to gather in the stones of the path. A monk in a robe the color of turmeric was walking it, alone, with his eyes lowered, carrying the shallow bowl that every wandering mendicant carried in those years. His name was Asaji. He was one of the first 5 students the Buddha had ever taught. But no one on this road knew that. They saw a thin man in a robe, walking slowly, going nowhere in particular, gathering the day's meal in the quiet way an alms-gatherer gathers. He walked the way someone walks who has no place they need to be. Not hurrying, not dawdling, feet touching the ground as though each step were a small, complete arrival. On the other side of the road, a young man happened to be walking in the opposite direction. He was tall. He was thin. He wore the white cloth of a householder who had not yet taken up the robe of any tradition. His name was Upatissa. In the years to come, the Buddha would give him another name, Sariputta, a name meaning the son of his mother, Sari, and that later name would become one of the most quietly powerful names in the whole history of this tradition. But on this particular morning, he was simply Upatissa, and he was tired. He was tired of searching. He had been a seeker for years by now. He had tried teachers. He had tried methods. He had sat at the feet of renowned Brahmins and listened to them speak about the nature of things. He had returned home each time with the same small, exhausted feeling that whatever he was looking for, this was not quite it. You may know the feeling. the one who has read many books on how to live and still does not quite know how to live. The one who has tried many practices and still carries the same restlessness to bed at night. The one who has been to the retreats, sat on the cushions, downloaded the apps, and is still looking. There is nothing wrong with this looking. The tradition calls it the search, and it honors it. But the search alone is exhausting, and Upatissa that morning was carrying the tiredness of a long search that had not yet found its resting place. And then he looked up. He saw the monk on the other side of the road. He could not have said, in that first second, why he stopped walking. Something had stopped him. His feet simply stood still on the dust of the road while a man in a turmeric robe passed in front of him with the slow, unhurried bearing of a person who was at home inside his own life. Upatissa watched him walk. The bowl, the quiet hands, the eyes lowered, not in avoidance, but in a kind of gentle attention that had nothing to prove and nothing to hide. The robe moved with him in a way that suggested the body underneath had nothing to argue with. Let me stop here for a moment. It matters what we recognize and how we recognize it. For years, Upatissa had been searching for the right teaching. He had been listening to words. He had been evaluating doctrines. He had been asking, is this the system that will explain things to me? And all of that searching had passed him by without resolution. What stopped him on this road was not a doctrine. It was a bearing. Bearing is a word we have almost lost. It used to mean the way a person carries themselves through a room, a street, an hour. Not their posture alone, not their confidence alone. The quality of their presence, the relationship between who they are and the body that moves them through the world. You can feel it when you encounter it. A person walks past you in an airport, and something in their unhurried pace, their unanxious eyes, makes you slow down for a moment yourself. A nurse comes into the hospital room where your parent is lying, and the air in the room settles before she has even spoken. A stranger on the bus is reading a book, and their stillness is so deep that for a second you forget you were anxious. Truth is recognized, first, by how it is carried, not by what it claims, not by what it promises, by how someone lives inside it when they think no one is watching. There is a certain kind of clarity that cannot be performed. A person who has actually sat through their own grief walks differently than a person who has read about grief. A person who has actually let go of wanting to be right speaks differently than a person who is pretending to have let go. A person who has stopped fighting their own tiredness breathes differently than a person who is still fighting it. The body cannot fake what the mind has not yet settled. And somewhere in us, even when we do not have the vocabulary for it, we can tell the difference. This is why the presence of a genuine teacher, in robes or not, famous or not, speaking or silent, has always had the quality of standing beside a very old tree. Nothing is being offered. Nothing is being sold. Something is simply present, in the way trees are present, and the shade of that presence is cool on the skin whether or not you understand why. Upatissa, on this road, was watching someone who did not know he was being watched. And what he saw was the first teaching he had received that did not need to be spoken. He followed the monk at a respectful distance. He did not interrupt the alms round. One did not. You waited until the monk had gathered what was given, had found a place to sit, had rested in the shade of a wall. Assaji eventually stopped at the corner of a small courtyard, in the shade of a mango tree, and sat to eat. Upatissa approached him and bowed and said the words people said to a renunciate whose tradition was unknown. Friend, your faculties are clear. Your complexion is bright. Under whom have you gone forth? Whose teaching do you follow? Assaji looked up. He did not answer immediately. He finished the mouthful he was eating. He set the bowl down. Then he said, "Friend, I am new to this path. I cannot teach you the whole of the teaching. My teacher is the ascetic of the Sakyan clan, the one they call the Awakened One. I can only tell you, in brief, the heart of what he teaches." "Brother," said Upatissa, "in brief is enough for me. Give me the meaning. The words are not the difficulty." And Assaji, sitting in the shade of the mango tree, with the bowl beside him and the ordinary sounds of the city moving past them on the road, said the verse that is one of the most often recited verses in the whole tradition. Of those things that arise from a cause, the Awakened One has told the cause, and also their cessation. This is the teaching of the great contemplative. Let the verse sit in the air for a moment. This is not a verse about becoming a better person. It is not a verse about achieving anything. It is the deepest structural claim of the tradition, reduced to 4 lines you can carry in your mouth for the rest of your life. Everything that arises because of something. Everything that ends because its conditions have ended. Nothing appears out of nowhere. Nothing persists by its own force. The world is conditions, meeting conditions, unfolding as the meetings allow, ceasing as the conditions dissolve. When Upatissa heard this, something opened. The tradition says he entered the stream, a specific stage of awakening in which the practitioner can no longer be pulled back into the deepest confusions of ordinary life. That does not mean he was perfected. It means that in the time it took Assaji to say 4 lines, something in Upatissa's understanding of reality had reorganized so completely that he could never quite unsee it. He stood up slowly. He bowed again. He thanked the monk. He asked where the teacher was staying, so that he might go and find him in time. And then he turned and walked home down the same road he had come by, a different person than the one who had walked up it an hour before. He did not run. He did not weep. He walked quietly, with the verse held inside him, like something he was learning to carry without dropping. Now stay with this for a moment before we lift out of the story. Upatissa had been searching for years. He had tried many teachers. None of them had been able to give him what a short conversation on a road in the shade of a mango tree gave him in the space of 4 lines. This is not an argument against trying teachers. It is an observation about what actually opens us. What opens us is not always what we have been looking for. Sometimes it is a stranger who passed us at exactly the hour we were ready to see him. Sometimes it is a verse we heard many times without hearing, until the day came when we could finally hear it. Sometimes it is a person whose bearing is so quiet that we follow them for 100 yards without knowing why. The readiness matters as much as the teaching. Asaji had given this same verse before to other people, and they had walked on. He would give it again to other people, and they would walk on. Upatissa was ready that morning, in a way he had not been ready the month before, because the tiredness of his search had brought him to the edge of his willingness to look outside himself for rescue. When we stop needing the teacher to be a certain shape, the teacher arrives in any shape. A sentence from a stranger on a bus. A song on the radio at the exact moment we needed it. A verse from a monk in a turmeric robe who did not know he was anyone's teacher at all. Perhaps the teacher for you is already somewhere inside today. Perhaps you have walked past them. Perhaps you will walk past them this evening and notice their bearing and stop for a moment without knowing why. Your job on the road is only to keep your eyes soft enough to see. Upatissa walked home with the verse held inside him, and his willingness had found a place to rest. There is another kind of meeting coming now. Not a meeting between a student and the teacher he has been searching for. A meeting between a monk and the hostile country he has chosen to walk into, with his eyes open, of his own willing. A different kind of courage is about to arrive, in a different kind of story, told quietly under a different sky. The sun was not yet fully up over the bamboo grove at Jetta's monastery. The birds had begun their first calls. The paths between the huts were still damp from the night. A monk named Punya was folding a spare robe into his bundle, slowly, the way a person folds cloth when he is thinking about something larger than what his hands are doing. He had decided the night before. He had not told anyone yet. He had sat in his hut until very late, considering what he was about to do, and had arrived at the quiet, settled feeling that comes when a person knows a choice is right, even though the choice will be difficult. Pune was going to Sunaparanta. Sunaparanta was a coastal country on the western edge of the subcontinent, far from any monastic community, known in those years for a reputation that travellers repeated in lowered voices. The people there were said to be hot-tempered, quick to insult, sometimes violent. No monk had been there. No teaching had been given there. Punya, who was himself originally from that region, had been turning it over in his mind for many weeks. He knew the country. He knew the temperament of its people. And he had decided that the teaching he had received should be carried there, even if it meant carrying it alone, into a country that might not thank him for bringing it. He had grown up among those people. He had heard their voices raised in the markets. He had watched disputes that in other regions would have been settled with words, settled in his home region with something harder than words. He knew what the warnings meant. He was not walking into Sunaparanta the way a traveller walks into a country he has only read about. He was walking back into a country he knew intimately, carrying something now that he had not been carrying when he had first left it. This is often how it is. The hard country we are returning to is often the one we came from. The family dinner we dread this weekend. The neighbourhood where old versions of ourselves still walk in the doorways of old shops. The workplace we have tried and failed to leave. We do not always get to carry the teaching to an easy country. More often, it is the country we already know that we will have to walk back into, with something steadier than we had the first time we walked out of it. As he tied the last knot of his bundle, he heard footsteps approaching his hut. The Buddha was walking toward him through the grove. Let me pause here for a moment. Picture the scene. A young man sitting on the threshold of a hut at dawn, his few possessions bundled on the ground beside him, the weight of a decision already settling into his chest. And the person he most respects in the world walking toward him across the wet grass, unhurried, the first sun catching the edge of a saffron robe. It is one of the quietest conversations in all the recorded teachings, and it asks more of a listener than almost any other. Because the conversation is about whether you can walk into a difficult country knowing it will be difficult and carry something unshakable with you anyway. The Buddha stopped at the entrance of the hut. He did not sit down. He looked at the bundle. He looked at Punya. Then he said, "I have heard, Punya, that you intend to go to Sunaparanta." "Yes, Blessed One," said Puna. "I intend to go, with your permission." The Buddha did not grant the permission right away. He asked a question instead. "Punya," he said, "the people of Sunaparanta are fierce. They are rough. If they speak to you with harsh words, with abuse, with insult, what will you think?" Punya thought for a moment. Then he said, "Blessed One, if they speak to me with harsh words, I will think, these people of Sunaparanta are kind. They are kind because they have insulted me, but they have not struck me with their hands." The Buddha nodded, not in approval exactly, but in acknowledgement. Then he asked the next question. "But Puna," he said, "if they strike you with their hands, what will you think?" Punya paused again. Then he said, "Blessed One, if they strike me with their hands, I will think, these people of Sunaparanta are kind. They are kind because they have struck me with their hands, but they have not thrown stones at me." Let the answer land for a moment before we continue. This is not the answer of someone who does not feel pain. It is the answer of someone who has decided in advance, in the quiet of his own hut, that pain does not get to be the final word. It is the answer of someone who has pre-offered his own comfort. There is a difference between absorbing harm and pre-offering comfort, and it matters very much. Absorbing harm is what happens when we have not prepared. We did not expect the insult. We did not expect the rudeness. We did not expect the cold silence from the person whose warmth we had counted on. And so when it arrives, we stagger. We take it on. We carry it home inside us. Pre-offering comfort is something else entirely. It is the quiet decision made in advance to hold a little less tightly to the thing that was about to be taken. Puna had already offered his comfort before he left the bamboo grove. He was not walking into Sunaparanta expecting courtesy. He was walking in expecting difficulty, and he had already set down, in his own mind, the small territories a person normally clutches, the expectation of being spoken to politely, the expectation of being received warmly, the expectation of being left alone when he wished to be alone. He had not renounced these things out of self-denial. He had renounced them because he had seen, clearly, that holding them would make him unable to do the work he was going there to do. There is a loosening available to you tonight that is the same loosening punya practiced at dawn. It is not a heroic gesture. It is not martyrdom. It is only the small, deliberate act of releasing one thing in advance, one expectation, one demand, one fantasy of how the day should go, so that when the day does not meet it, you are not broken by the mismatch. This is the ground under hostility. The ground is not hardness. The ground is willingness. The conversation in the hut continued. Punya, said the Buddha, but if they throw stones at you, what will you think? Blessed One, said Punya, if they throw stones at me, I will think, these people of Sunaparanta are kind. They have thrown stones, but they have not beaten me with clubs. The Buddha went on. And if they beat you with clubs, if they beat me with clubs, I will think, these people of Sunaparanta are kind. They have beaten me, but they have not cut me with a knife. The stakes were rising in the dialogue like the tide rising up ashore. Each answer softer than seemed possible. Each answer more peaceful than the last. The disciples who had begun to gather at the edge of the grove were watching in a stillness that was no longer quite ordinary stillness. Stay inside that stillness with them for a moment. They are watching a person they know rearrange the basic terms on which hostility is usually met. The disciples had seen the Buddha stay calm under insult before. They had seen him speak gently to kings who tried to corner him. They had never quite seen a fellow monk, one of their own, answer these questions with this much unbracedness. Something was being demonstrated in front of them that they would carry into the rest of their lives. The Buddha asked the final question. Puna, if they take a sharp knife and take your life, what will you think then? Puna looked at the Buddha. He did not hesitate. He said, Blessed One, if they take a knife and take my life, I will think, these people of Sunaparanta are kind. There are students of yours who, disgusted and ashamed of this body, have looked for a knife with which to end it themselves. These people have done for me, without my asking, what I would not have known how to ask for. Stay inside that answer for a moment. The Buddha was silent for a long time. The birds continued their mourning. The sun moved another hand's width up the sky. Then the Buddha said, "Punna, with this patience, with this quietness of heart, you are equipped to live among the people of Sunaparanta. Go, Punna, and teach." Punna bowed. He lifted the bundle to his shoulder. He walked past the gathered disciples and out through the gate of the monastery and onto the western road. The tradition tells us he reached Sunaparanta. It tells us he taught there. It tells us many people listened. It tells us he was not killed. He lived out his days among the people he had been warned were fierce, and he found that fierceness is almost always a surface, and that underneath most fierceness is fear, and that fear loosens in the company of someone who is not afraid of it. Come back now to the hour you are in. Notice the weight of wherever you are sitting or lying. Notice the small sounds around you. Notice the quality of your own breath. You are not being asked to go to a hostile country. You are being asked something smaller and harder and more available. You are being asked to consider which of your tomorrows you could pre-offer tonight. The meeting you are dreading. The phone call you are avoiding. The person who tends to speak to you sharply. The one you tighten for before you have even seen them. The email that is sitting in your drafts folder, waiting for a reply. You do not have to make yourself invulnerable. Invulnerability is not the teaching. You only have to loosen your grip, one notch, on the expectation that tomorrow owes you softness. If they are sharp with you, they are kind. They are kind because they did not strike you. This is not a mantra to recite. It is a posture of heart to rehearse, quietly, the night before the difficult day. Because here is what the tradition has been saying all along, in the voices of all its teachers. From the time of Punna to this evening, you cannot control what is coming toward you. You can only control, and only sometimes, what you are holding when it arrives. A person with empty hands cannot have their cup knocked over. A person who has already given something cannot have it taken from them. A person who has already pre-offered their comfort cannot be surprised into anger when the comfort is denied. This is not coldness. This is not detachment. Punna was not cold that morning. He was warm enough to walk willingly into a country that had asked for nothing. The willingness was his warmth. Feel, for a moment, what it would be like to walk into tomorrow with that warmth. Not braced. Not pre-angry. Not rehearsing your defense. Simply willing. Willing for it to be what it is. Willing to meet what meets you. Willing to find, as Punna found, that most fierceness is surface, and most surfaces soften in the company of someone who is not afraid of them. Notice the softening that might already be happening in your body just from imagining this. The shoulders coming down a 1/4 inch. The jaw letting go of a clench you did not know you were holding. The willingness lives in the body before it lives in the mind. When the body agrees to stop bracing, the mind follows a moment later. You can rehearse this every evening before tomorrow arrives. One breath, one loosening, one quiet sentence whispered inside the chest. Let tomorrow be what it is. I will be willing anyway. This is the patience the Buddha recognized in punya. It was not the patience of someone who had not yet been hurt. It was the patience of someone who had chosen, in advance, what he was willing to carry and what he was willing to set down. Puna walked west. The sun rose behind him. The monastery faded in the distance. And somewhere in this same tradition, in a small workshop in a village far from any monastery, a different kind of patient work was being done by a different kind of teacher, a teacher whose hands knew a craft very different from walking into hostile countries. A goldsmith was beginning his morning, and he was about to teach something without knowing he was teaching anything at all, about the patience of long, slow work. Stay with the breath. Stay with Puna's willingness. The fire in the goldsmith's hearth is already lit. The fire had been lit before sunrise. A small fire. The goldsmith did not need a great blaze for what he was doing. He needed a steady heat that would hold its temperature across the slow hours of the morning. His workshop was a low-roofed room at the side of a small courtyard in the city. Stone walls. A hearth built into the corner. A small anvil. A set of bellows worked by a boy who lived in the house. A row of files and pincers hanging on pegs above the bench. The goldsmith sat on a low stool in front of the hearth. His hands were the color of old wood. They moved slowly. They knew what they were doing. On the bench in front of him, wrapped in a square of coarse cloth, lay the ore. A grey lump, streaked with darker veins, heavy for its size, dug out of a riverbed many days' walk from here and carried to the city on the back of a donkey. Inside that lump, somewhere, was gold. The goldsmith knew this the way a fisherman knows the sea. He could not yet see it, but he knew it was there. He began. The first work was the coarsest. He took up a small hammer and broke the lump apart. He sifted through the fragments with his fingers. He pulled out the obvious stones, the obvious gravel, the pieces that were plainly not metal at all. These he tossed back into a wooden bowl at his feet to be discarded later. He did not linger with them. He did not mourn them. They had simply come along with the gold, and now they were going their own way. This was the first refinement. The gross impurities. The things that were clearly not what he was looking for. I want to stop with him here for a moment, because the Buddha used exactly this image when he taught about the cultivation of the heart. In a discourse preserved in the numerical discourses, the Buddha described the mind being prepared toward awakening as a piece of gold being prepared by a goldsmith. He said there are first the gross impurities, then the middling ones, then the subtle ones, and each of them is removed in its own time, at its own heat, by its own patience. The gross impurities, he said, are the ones you can see plainly. The harm you do to others in actions of the body, the cruelty in speech, the obvious cravings that pull you where you know you should not go. These are the stones in the lump. A person who is serious about their life notices them first, because they are the things that clatter when shaken. And here is what I want you to hear. The beginning of any genuine inner work is always this kind of work. Coarse, visible, a little embarrassing, sometimes, because you see what you have been doing and you cannot unsee it. The person who will not tell the truth to a family member, the person who drinks more than they want to, the person who speaks to the one they love in a way they would never want spoken to them. You do not need a teacher to name these things. Your own quiet attention will name them, if you give it a moment of silence. The goldsmith now took the fragments that remained, the pieces that still held something metallic in them, and placed them into a clay crucible. He slid the crucible into the heart of the fire. The boy worked the bellows, slowly, slowly, and the color of the fire changed. Red, then orange, then a deep, sleepy yellow that the goldsmith had been watching for. He let it sit. This is the second refinement. The heating. The place where things that seemed bonded together begin to separate. Because the fire is patient, and because nothing can hold on to what it is not when the heat is right. In the Buddha's image, the middling impurities are the things that do not clatter. They do not announce themselves. The subtle resentments, the low, continuous habit of comparing yourself to the people around you, the half-second of satisfaction when a rival fails, the quiet story you tell about why you deserve more than you have. These are the black sand in the crucible. They are not obvious until the fire has been working for a while. They rise to the surface only when the heat has reached a certain patience. And this, too, I want you to hear clearly. This is the part of inner work that most people abandon, because it is slower, because nothing dramatic is happening, because the fire is on, the crucible is in, and you are waiting, and the waiting feels like nothing is changing, and the mind begins to say, perhaps this is not working, perhaps I should try something different, perhaps I should add more wood, open the door, take the crucible out early, do anything at all to make something feel like it is happening. The goldsmith does not add more wood. He has been doing this for 30 years. He knows the heat is right. He knows the crucible is where it should be. He knows that the slow, patient temperature is doing work that no dramatic blaze could do. He lets it sit. And while he waits, something begins to happen. The molten metal in the crucible begins to move. A thin, dark scum rises to the top. He leans forward. He lifts it off with a small iron spoon. He looks at it with the calm satisfaction of a man who knows that this rising is exactly the sign of the work being done. Your resentments, when they rise, are not a sign that you are a bad person. They are a sign that the heat is right. They are the middling impurities coming up to the surface, where the calm attention of your practice can lift them off. Let this land for a moment. When you sit quietly in the evening and suddenly an old grievance comes back to you, vivid, embarrassing, full of a pettiness you thought you had outgrown, you are not failing. You are being worked. The fire has reached the middle layer. The black sand is rising. The calm attention of your practice is the small iron spoon. The goldsmith has been at this work for an hour now. The surface of the molten metal is quieter. The dark scum has stopped rising. He does not declare the work finished. He knows there is one more stage. The Buddha called these the subtle impurities. The finest dust, the things so small that they cannot be seen, only inferred from the color of the metal. In the image, these are the last traces of what has already been mostly cleared. In the cultivation of a human heart, these are the quiet movements that remain, even when the obvious and the middling have passed. A subtle pride in having done inner work. A quiet preference for certain people over others. A barely noticed reluctance to fully let go of a story about who you are. These are only the last visitors the fire is still working on. The goldsmith now brings the crucible out of the hearth and sets it on a stone. He tips it gently. The metal pours. It is clearer now than when it went in. He lets it cool in a small mold. He will return to it later. He will reheat it once more at a softer temperature and work with a still finer eye to draw off the last faint dust that the first two heatings did not quite reach. This is the third refinement. It is the slowest and the most tender and the one that requires the most trust, because by this stage the metal already looks like gold and it is easy to think the work is done. The Buddha said of the mind being cultivated in this way, that when the subtle impurities have been removed, the mind becomes pliant, workable, soft enough to take the shape that wisdom wants to give it, without breaking under the touch. Stay with that word for a moment. Pliant. The goal of practice is not a hard, perfected mind. The goal is a soft, workable mind. One that can be shaped gently by the hands of your own wisest attention into the life that your deepest understanding would have you live. The heaviness you came in with tonight is not a stone you need to lift. It is ore, carried here from somewhere distant in your own life. Heavy for its size and streaked with darker veins and not yet obviously precious. The fire is the practice. The patience is the refinement. The slow, undramatic work of sitting with what rises, noticing what has come up today, letting the calm attention of your awareness lift it off without shame and without triumph. You You do not need to feel the change each day. The goldsmith cannot see the gold for most of the morning. He trusts the fire. He trusts the temperature. He trusts that the work being done in the heat is exactly the work that needs to be done. In the late afternoon, when the sun has begun to slant through the small window of his workshop, he pours the final, purest metal into the shape he has been waiting all day to make. He does not make a crown. He does not make a throne. He makes something small. A thin band of gold, perhaps, or a single smooth shape that will be given to a temple down the road, where a monk with quiet hands will receive it without any fuss, and place it on the altar, and return to his sweeping. This is the quiet truth the Buddha saw when he borrowed the goldsmith's secret and made it the image of how a human life is cultivated. We are not refined in a single breakthrough. We are refined slowly, over patient heatings, by an attention that is steady, kind, and unafraid of what rises. There is another kind of small, quiet making coming now. Not a goldsmith in a city workshop. A creature in a forest at the edge of a long winter who is about to do something so simple and so complete that it has been carried in the tradition for many centuries. The fire in the hearth dies down to its evening coals. The smoke rises into the dusk. Somewhere else, in a different country, a small animal is beginning to move. The wind moved in the tall grass. The light was the pale silver that comes between sun and moon, when one has gone down and the other has not yet risen high enough to take its place. A hare sat in the clearing at the edge of a small forest, his ears alert, his small body very still, his breath quiet as the breath of a sleeping child. He had lived in this forest for all the days of his life. He knew the tracks of the deer. He knew the smell of the water. He knew the place under the banyan tree where the three friends he walked with most often gathered at dusk. A monkey, an otter, a jackal, and he was making his way to that place now through the cooling air. Tomorrow would be the full moon. In the villages beyond the forest, the humans kept an old custom on full moon days. They would set out a plate of rice. They would greet any wanderer who came to the door. They would try, for one day of the month, to live a little more quietly, a little more gently, a little more like the people they kept hoping they would one day become. The four animals had heard of this custom, and the hare, who was, in the stories the tradition tells, the Buddha in an earlier life, had gathered his friends the night before and spoken about it. We too, he said, should do this. We too should keep the full moon observance. If any beggar comes to our part of the forest tomorrow, let each of us give to that beggar whatever we have. The monkey had said yes. The otter had said yes. The jackal had said yes. And the hare had looked quietly at the ground between his paws, because the hare knew something the others did not yet know. Each of them had something they could give. Mangoes for the monkey, fish for the otter. The jackal, being a jackal, had his own ways of finding something. And the hare ate grass. And grass is not something that can be offered to a human being. Stay with him for a moment before the story moves. He is a small, plain being in a small, plain body, and what he eats is grass. And the problem he is turning over in his mind tonight is not a philosophical one. It is a practical one. When the beggar comes, what will I give? Perhaps you know this problem. Not in its literal shape. In the shape it takes when you are the tired one at the end of the long week. When someone you love needs something from you and you have been giving already for so many hours that the well seems dry. When a stranger stops you and asks for what little you have, and your hands are full of your own difficult day, and you do not know what is left in you to give. This is the question the hare is sitting with in the clearing. And because he carries, in the old stories, the mind that will one day become the Buddha, he is going to find an answer that is quiet and complete, and very different from the answer the monkey or the otter or the jackal will find in their own baskets. The night passed. The moon rose full. By morning the forest was bright with a silver light that made each leaf seem lit from inside. Now, in the old story, a figure comes walking into the forest on that full moon morning. The tradition names him Saka, the king of the radiant beings who dwell in a higher realm, a being the tradition calls a Devatar, which means a luminous one. He had heard about the hare. He had heard about the promise the four animals had made. And he had come down into the world, taking the shape of a poor, hungry Brahmin, to see for himself what the hare would do. Let me ground that word for you, because the tradition uses it often. A Devatar in the early Buddhist texts is a luminous being who lives in one of the higher realms. It is simply another kind of being whose existence the early tradition accepted as part of the fabric of the world. Saka in the old stories often plays this role. He descends. He tests. He sees what the creature below will actually do when the moment arrives. He came first to the monkey. The monkey, when asked for food, climbed a tree and brought down a pile of ripe mangoes and set them at the feet of the Brahmin and said, "Please, take what you need." The Brahmin smiled gently and thanked him and walked on. He came next to the otter. The otter pulled a string of silver fish from the place by the river where he had set them to keep cool and laid them on a broad leaf and said, "Please, eat." The Brahmin smiled and thanked him and walked on. He came next to the jackal. The jackal, who had found something left behind by a hunter, a portion of dried meat, wrapped in cloth, laid it down and said, "Please, take this if it will ease your hunger." The Brahmin smiled and thanked him and walked on. And then he came to the hare. The hare bowed his small head and said, "Sir, I have nothing that can be given to a human being." What I eat is grass. Grass is not food for you. But if you will wait, I can still give you what a hare has to give." The Brahmin waited. The hare asked him, "Please, make a fire." The Brahmin gathered sticks and lit a small fire at the edge of the clearing. The smoke rose straight up into the morning. The flames were low and steady. And the hare, the small plain body, the quick breath, the creature who knew the tracks of the deer and the smell of the water, walked up to the edge of that fire and offered his own body to it and leapt. Stay with that moment. Do not flinch away from it yet. The tradition tells us that as the hare leapt, the fire did not burn him. The Brahmin shed his disguise. Saka stood in the clearing in his own luminous form and lifted the hare gently out of the flames and said, "Little one, what you have done today will be remembered." And in the old story, he drew the image of the hare on the face of the moon, so that on every full moon night thereafter, human beings looking up would see a small rabbit shape in the silver and would remember a creature who had offered what he was when he could not offer what he had. This is why, in many countries across this tradition's long travels, people still look up at the full moon and see the shape of a rabbit inside it. Let the story breathe for a moment. I want to be careful with you here, because the literal image of a creature leaping into a fire is not the teaching. The teaching lies underneath the image. The teaching is about what giving actually is. When you have emptied your basket and the beggar is still standing at your door. The monkey gave mangoes. The otter gave fish. The jackal gave the meat he had found. Each of them gave something they had gathered and could easily spare. The hare gave what he was. And the old tradition remembered the hare's gift, not because it was dramatic, but because it was the only gift that contained the giver completely. You do not need to leap into a fire. The story is not asking that of you. The story is asking a quieter thing. When you have reached the end of what you have, can you offer the one thing that no one else can give? The quality of your attention, the warmth of your presence, the simple, complete offering of who you actually are, in this room, in this hour, to the person in front of you. A parent, at the end of a long day, sits by their child's bed and tells them they love them. Nothing else is given. No gift is produced. And the child, feeling that presence, is held. A friend, who has nothing to say that will fix the thing, sits beside the one who is grieving and does not leave and does not look at the clock. Nothing else is given, and the grief, feeling that presence, is less alone. A stranger, on a crowded train, lets another stranger have the last seat and does not make a fuss about it and looks out the window. Nothing else is given, and the world, for a second, is a little kinder than it was a minute before. These are hare gifts, the kind of gift that does not come from the basket, the kind that comes from the creature. The tradition has a word for this quality of giving. The word is dana, which means, in simple English, generosity. The early teachings distinguish between the giving of things and the giving of oneself, and they say that when the second kind is offered, even from a small body with a quick breath, the offering reaches further than any basket of mangoes could. There is a way to hear this story that makes you feel worse about yourself, as though the teaching was saying, you should give more, you should give everything, you should be like the hare. That is not the teaching. The teaching is gentler. The teaching is saying, when you have nothing left in your basket, you are not empty. You are still a creature, and the creature is always the true gift. On the days when you have no mangoes, no fish, no dried meat, you still have the one thing no one else can bring, the simple fact of you, present, willing, quiet, in the space where another being is asking for warmth. If you are listening tonight at the end of a heavy day, feeling as though your basket is empty, hear the hare's secret as it is really meant. You are not asked to produce something. You are asked only not to leave the clearing. Stay. Be present. The presence itself is the mangoes and the fish and the meat, all folded into one soft offering that takes no effort to produce, because it is already what you are. The moon in the sky tonight is already silver with that old memory. Look up sometime soon and find the rabbit shape in its face. And remember that one of the oldest acts of generosity in this tradition was an act of complete, quiet presence from a creature who thought he had nothing to give. There is one more story coming. A last image, larger than all the others, that the Buddha himself used toward the end of his life, when he wanted to describe what is actually approaching all of us, at all hours, from all directions, and what the only wise response to it might be. The small fire in the clearing goes out. The hare walks quietly back into the grass, and somewhere on the horizon, at the edge of the next country, 4 mountains are beginning to move. The dust of a long afternoon had settled on the shoulders of a tired king. He came into the grove in a sandalwood carriage, with a small retinue around him, and he stopped the carriage some distance from the place where the Buddha was staying, and walked the rest of the way on foot, as the custom of that time required of a king who was visiting a teacher. His name was Pasenadi. He was the ruler of the kingdom of Kosala, one of the 2 great powers of that age. He was a friend of the Buddha. He had known the Buddha for many years by now. He came to the grove often, when the affairs of his kingdom permitted. This afternoon was one of the days he had come. He arrived at the small wooden hut at the edge of the grove, where the Buddha was sitting in the shade, and he bowed and sat down to one side and said nothing for a moment while his breath slowed. The Buddha looked at him kindly. "Great King," he said, "from where are you coming at this hour of the day, with the dust still on your shoulders?" Pasenadi smiled a small, tired smile. "Venerable Sir," he said, "I have been about the work of a king. I have been at the borders, looking at the reports. I have been at the treasury, listening to the accounts. I have been in the council hall, settling disputes. I have been doing what a king like me spends his days doing. The Buddha sat quietly with that for a breath. Then he said, "Great king, suppose a man came to you now from the east. A trustworthy man, a man whose word you had always found to be true. And suppose this man, coming before you, said, 'Sire, may your majesty know, I have come from the east. I have seen there a great mountain, as high as the clouds, rolling this way, crushing everything that lives. Do what you can do.'" The king looked up. "And now suppose," said the Buddha, "that a second man came to you from the south with the same news, and a third man from the west with the same news, and a fourth man from the north with the same news. 4 mountains rolling in from the 4 directions, crushing everything that lives, and you are in the small circle of earth where they have not yet arrived. What, great king, would you do?" Pasenadi sat with the question. He was a clever king. He had a treasury. He had an army. He had ministers, chariots, elephants, a wall around the city. He had the whole apparatus of a powerful life. And he sat with the question as a person sits with something true that has just been placed in front of them, and he knew, in his own quiet knowing, that the apparatus would not help. "Venerable sir," he said at last, "when such a great terror has arisen, when the destruction of human life is so difficult to avoid, what else can be done? What else is there to do but to live by what is true, to act with kindness, to do what is skillful while there is still time?" The Buddha looked at him for a long moment. "I declare to you, great king," he said, "I announce to you, old age and death are rolling upon you." The king sat very still. "Old age is one mountain," said the Buddha. "It is rolling from one of the 4 directions. It is a slow mountain. It cannot be stopped. Whatever you have, it does not care. A king's body turns grey the way a farmer's body turns grey. Sickness is another mountain. It comes when it comes. A treasury will not turn it back. An army cannot be sent against it. A wall will not keep it out of the bedchamber. The loss of the ones you love is another mountain. It is rolling toward every person in every village, at every hour of every day, and it does not ask whether your house is large or small. And death is the 4th mountain. It is the one all the others roll ahead of. It moves at its own pace. It does not negotiate. When the 4 mountains are rolling upon you, great king, said the Buddha, what is there to do? Pasenadi bowed his head. Venerable sir, he said, when the 4 mountains are rolling upon me, what else is there to do? What else is there to do but to live by the Dhamma, to act with kindness, to do what is skillful while there is still time? Let the whole conversation sit for a moment before we move. This is one of the most straightforwardly honest teachings in the tradition. The Buddha is not offering the king a trick. He is not promising him immortality. He is not offering him a way to stop the mountains. He is simply pointing, with a kind and unflinching finger, at what is actually the case, and then asking the only question that has any real weight once the case has been seen. What will you do? The image is severe, but notice what the severity does. It clears the small confusions away. When you picture 4 mountains rolling toward you from the 4 directions, a great many things you were worrying about an hour ago become small. The argument with the colleague, the unread email, the thing your neighbor said, the shape of the body in the mirror, the number in the bank account. These are small hills. They are not mountains. There is something therapeutic about letting the real size of things come back into view. The heaviness you have been carrying this week, the real heaviness, is usually not the small hills. It is the quiet knowledge, underneath everything, that time is moving, that people you love will not be here forever, that your own body is going in the direction all bodies go. When you name the real thing, the small hills stop pretending to be mountains, and the air in the chest loosens a little, because the mind is no longer fighting a shape it could not name. This is one of the medicines the Buddha keeps offering across these stories. Not the medicine of escape, the medicine of seeing clearly. Now sit with the king's answer, because the king's answer is also the Buddha's answer. When the mountains are rolling, what is there to do? To live by the Dhamma, to act with kindness, to do what is skillful while there is still time. Hear how quiet that answer is. It is not dramatic. It is not the answer of a man who is panicking. It is the answer of a man who has been asked the real question, who has felt its weight, and who has found that underneath the panic there is a simple, dignified path that is always available, at every age, in every body, on every afternoon. The practice does not save you from the mountains. The practice is the thing that can be lived even while the mountains are rolling. These are 2 different claims, and the tradition has always been careful about the difference. No teaching in this lineage will stop your body from aging. No teaching will prevent the ones you love from going ahead of you or behind you through the door that opens once for each person. No teaching will hold back the slow mountain that is already a long way along the road toward where you are standing. What the teaching offers is different. It is the permission and the practice of walking across the circle of earth where you are still standing, as though each step on that circle were worth taking fully, as though each hour left were long enough to be kind in. The kingdom is rolling toward its end, and in the circle of earth where you are standing, you can still turn to the person beside you and speak gently to them. You can still sit with your own breath for 10 long minutes in the morning. You can still put your hand on the shoulder of someone who is grieving. You can still keep the one small promise you made to yourself about how you would like to live. This is the Dhamma the king was pointing at. This is what the Buddha was asking about. This is what is available, even now, even tonight, even in a life that feels heavy. Notice something else about the king's answer. The king does not say, "I will fight the mountains." The king does not say, "I will build a higher wall." The king does not even say, "I will try to live longer." The king says, "I will live by what is true." Living by what is true is not a heroic act. It is a small and steady act. It is the way a person sweeps a floor when no one is watching. It is the way a person tells the truth when a lie would be easier. It is the way a person stays in the room when the room is difficult. These are the acts that stack up quietly across a life, and they form the inner ground that cannot be rolled over by any mountain, because they are not a thing that can be taken. They are only a way of being. There is a quiet teaching here for anyone who has been listening all the way through this evening. When life feels heavy, it is often because the mountains have come into view more clearly than they usually do. A death in the family has moved them closer. A diagnosis has moved them closer. A birthday with a new number has moved them closer. An ordinary Tuesday has moved them closer for no reason you can name. The heaviness is not a sign that something has gone wrong in you. The heaviness is a sign that you have seen something true, and your small body, carrying a lot of ordinary responsibilities, is registering the size of what has been seen. The answer is not to unsee it. The answer is to respond to it with the practice. Light a candle. Call the person you have been meaning to call. Forgive a small thing. Eat slowly. Speak gently to the child. Sit for 10 long minutes with the breath, and do not try to make anything happen. Write the difficult letter. Offer what the hare offered, which was the creature itself. Carry the small lamp. Receive the teaching from the stranger on the road. Be refined by the patient fire of your own attention. These are the forms the Dhamma takes in a life the size of yours. They are small. They are ordinary. They are also, according to the oldest voices of this tradition, the only things that have any real weight when the mountains are rolling. King Pasenadi stayed in the grove a little longer that afternoon. He sat in the shade. He drank a little water. He watched the light change on the leaves above him. He did not say much more. Eventually he bowed and stood up and walked back out to where his carriage was waiting and rode home through the evening air with a quieter mind than he had come with. The mountains did not stop rolling. The mountains never stop rolling. But the king had remembered the shape of the only adequate response, and in remembering it, a certain kind of heaviness had lifted off him, because the heaviness of not knowing what to do is often heavier than the heaviness of the thing itself. You, listening now, are the king in this story. The small circle of earth, where the mountains have not yet arrived, is the hour you are sitting in. The Dhamma the king was pointing at is available to you in exactly the form the king pointed at, in the ordinary shape of the next quiet, kind, skillful act you will choose to make. The heaviness you came in with tonight was not a sign that you had failed at being calm. It was a sign that you had been carrying the truth of things, and no one had yet helped you set it down into a shape you could live with. Here is that shape. Walk the small circle. Do what is skillful while there is still time. Be gentle with the creatures around you. Be gentle with the creature that is you. The evening is coming. The 9 stories have been told. There is one last thing to say before we close, and it is the quietest thing of all. Wherever you are sitting tonight, in a bed, in a chair by a small lamp, in a car still warm from the day, let your body be where it is for one more minute before you move. The 9 stories are told. The evening has gone quiet. The house is the house. The breath is the breath. You came in with a heaviness, and the heaviness has not been taken from you. That was never what the tradition promised. What the tradition offers is different. The heaviness has been set inside a wider room where it is no longer the only thing present. Around your heaviness tonight are a widow who became a teacher, a fisherman's son who became a mountain, a musician who stopped tuning his strings, a young monk who remembered that this day is the only day, a seeker who met his teacher on an ordinary road, a monk who walked without fear into hostile country, a goldsmith at a patient fire, a hare who offered what he was, a king who learned what to do when the mountains are rolling. You are in their company now. Breathe out once, slowly. And if you are very tired, let yourself sleep in a little while, in the company you have been given. May your next hour be gentle. May your next day be skillful. May the small circle of earth where you are still standing be enough for you tonight to live a little more kindly inside.